I'm Josh Allen, and welcome to the Baked In Podcast, where I sit down with industry innovators to uncover the unique ideas and values that are baked into their businesses and have led to extraordinary success. This podcast is presented by Busey Bank. Since Busey opened their doors in 1868, they've upheld a pledge to foster customer relationships and vibrant communities, embodying a legacy of partnership and progress. With multiple lines of business, Busey provides a range of financial solutions tailored to your needs. From digital banking to planning for retirement, Busey is here to help you achieve your financial goals. Busey Bank, building business, growing wealth since 1868. Learn more at busey.com. Joining me today is Rick Oleshak, the Global Strategic Marketing Director at AB Biotek, a division of AB Mauri. Rick is at the helm of crafting global strategies and driving innovation for a company that leads in fermentation solutions across industries like consumer alcohol, bioethanol, and nutrition. But Rick's expertise doesn't stop there. With a career that spans nearly 3 decades, he's brought brands to life at household names like Anheuser-Busch, where he led marketing for Stella Artois and Budweiser, and earlier in sports with NASCAR and the Orlando Magic. From building global marketing campaigns to fostering customer insights, Rick has a unique ability to connect strategy with storytelling, all while staying ahead in fast-evolving industries. Today, we'll uncover the lessons he's learned, the challenges of adapting to new industries, and his vision for the future of marketing and brand growth. Let's roll. So, Rick, I am thrilled to have you here this morning. Thank you for joining me.
This is awesome. Thanks, Josh. You're kind of turning the tables on me a little bit.
Yeah, I know you have your own podcast, which we can certainly talk about, that I was a guest on a couple months ago, which was a lot of fun. And just for context here, I buy my yeast from the company that you work for currently, and a few clean label enzymes and some other stuff that we use in baking. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, but really you have this incredibly diverse background that I'm kind of excited to talk about.
I'm glad you're excited to talk about it. I don't know about I am, but yeah, let's give it a shot. I think we'll have some fun.
But to set the stage here. So you work for you're the global market leader for AB Biotek. At least that's what it says on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting voyage of how you get to your current role. But right now, I spend 2/3 of my time for AB Mauri, and we're a baking ingredients company. You just talked about Fleischmann's.
Based out of
St. Louis, but we're part of AB Mauri globally, which is in Peterborough, UK, a couple hours north of London. But we're under the umbrella of Associated British Foods, a big CPG company a lot of people aren't even familiar with. It's over, probably $20-25 billion of business. Everything from Twinings tea to Primark, and Primark is a big competitor to H&M, for example. So clothing, we're talking fast fashion. Sure. You want flip-flops for $7 or $8. You want a Rolling Stones t-shirt for 12 pounds, you can get it, and it's pretty cool. And it's now in the U.S., so Primark is a fun stopping choice, and I like to go check them out whenever I can. The other third of my role is AB Biotek, and it's a business division of AB Mauri technically, and it's all the non-baking stuff. So now we're talking yeast that goes into that good stuff like beer and wine and distilled spirits, seltzer, cider. Also, that goes into your gas tank with biofuel, and then also things like animal and human nutrition. So that's a third of my role that's global from that perspective. The North America side is the baking side.
And I mean, how do you, when you think about this and all this diversity and all of this, and you're sort of covering this whole umbrella from a marketing perspective, how do you look at, how do you set a kind of a global value system or global precedent, but then attack all of these different industries and all of these different countries? How do you break that down, and how big is the team that you're leading with all of them?
Not a huge team at all. I was historically the mentality for the company is we let the regions kind of run their own parts of business. So North America, you go do what you do best. ANZ with Australia, New Zealand, go do how you think the business should be run. And from a global standpoint at the headquarters, there isn't a lot of there aren't a lot of headcount, So I went down this path with AB Biotek in terms of trying to create the business, which actually was started here in St. Louis with a colleague of mine, Greg Strauss. He came from Coca-Cola, was a sales guy for AB Mauri for years. And then they said, Greg, go run this new part of the business of yeast for beer and wine. and distilled spirits and biofuel and all that.
And how long ago was that?
And that was 10 years ago now.
So right in the heart of the craft beer boom.
Yeah, it was. And the fun thing was I had just come from Anheuser-Busch. I was a year or two into the company here, and they said, hey, we need to create a whole new business. So, going in and creating logos like AB Biotek, and how many bubbles do you have, and what are the colors? It's green and blue. And we have a theme called Passion About Baking for baking, but what's the right terminology? What's going to inspire a customer? How about partners in fermentation, right? We're very hands-on. You probably know it from the baking side, but we know fermentation, and we want to be there with our customers and making sure they have a successful outcome. So all those kind of things built up what was a business for North America, and then Global adopted it and kind of took it under their own wing. From there, I was able to hire a couple people on the marketing side, one based in the UK, one based in a research center that we have in the Netherlands, and then we're off to the races.
Wow.
Yeah. But wait, there's more.
I'm sure. No. So, one of the things that I wanted to touch on, because I think it's interesting, and it's the part about you that I find really enjoyable, is we have these trade shows every couple of years. And you, more than anybody that I've come across at these trade shows, have really kind of leaned in really heavily into creating a theme, creating a brand presence. And I'm kind of interested, because I think there's probably people that have to attend trade shows and or stand at a booth for 3 days at something like this. And obviously you're doing it across multiple industries now that you're kind of covering fermentation. So I'm sure trade shows are a big piece of what you do. How do you take a look at that? How do you value those? And then how do you use it to both build sort of internal branding and camaraderie, which I know that you do with your team, and then also external branding?
Well, what's interesting about us, AB Mauri and AB Biotek are both B2B companies, right? So we're selling to somebody who is selling to the ultimate end consumer, right? So we sell into a bakery, for example. It could be Companion, could be a large industrial baker like Flowers Foods. But then their ingredients, kind of put together, and then they sell something on the shelf that goes to the end consumer. And that's kind of the beauty of it, is there's an opportunity for us. I don't care if it's CPG or it's a business to business. Your first job is to inspire your people internally. If you don't get that, you've kind of already lost the race, because you already have a huge congregation of people that can be your best asset, or they could be your worst enemy. So I'd rather be on the positive side and give them something to latch onto. So when it comes to these big trade shows, the one we're already prepping for, and it happens every 3 years in baking, is the International Baking Industry Exposition. It happens in Las Vegas every 3 years. We're getting ready for September 2025. And when I started with a company here, almost 11 years ago, there's an opportunity to do some things to get people excited internally as well as externally. So can I dial back a little bit and give you a little history lesson?
Absolutely. Because I think that was, I think it was the most crowded booth at the show last time that I was there.
Yeah.
And you're selling not the most exciting ingredient. And candidly,
or
in baking, I
know, I hear
say that, but candidly in baking, we expect it to work. We sort of know it. We have our supplier, and that's what we do. But I generally don't think I got to go visit those guys other than to say hello when I go to a trade show, right? There's equipment, there's robotics.
Oh, it's a destination
really cool
now. It's a destination. Yeah.
Now it's become a destination.
But we've done it 3 times now. So in 2016, we did virtual reality. This is like right at the height, right when things were really starting to get going in terms of virtual reality, augmented reality, all that. In 2019, this is like the nice little tip of the cap to you. A lot of people in the industry did virtual reality again. So we're 3 years ahead. But again, you only have an opportunity to do this every 3 years. So we did that. We had goggles. We had our biggest competitors. The chairman of the board for one of our biggest competitors had AB Mauri goggles on his face, and I still have the photo, but nobody's seen it. But I've got it in my back pocket if I ever need it. And he got up and he said, "Fantastic." And that's as good as a reaction you'll get from anybody, whether it's a competitor or not. 2019, we turned the tables and said, wow, we need some help a little bit. And we started looking out to who's in the baking industry, who's got just some energy and a little bit of the dynamic thought that we want to have. And we found Duff Goldman. He's Ace of Cakes. He's on Food Network, does a lot of the kids baking championships and such. And he's just a free thinker. And we said, boy, Duff, can you help us? We want to do something cool, but guess what? I don't want you to make cake. I want you to help us create an art gallery. And we did. We brought in a baking performance troupe from London who wore pink jumpsuits and carried around 25 pounds of dough. And they just let the dough slink around them like a big snake. And people were like, what is going on? But it made you want to take your phone out and take a photo and be like, I don't know what this is, but it was kind of cool. And it was definitely shareable. So we created an art gallery. We brought in an artist who created American Gothic out of portraits of donuts. So when you're up close, you just see donuts. You step back 25 feet and you see American Gothic. But it's in pastry, right? And then in 2022, we said, Duff, we're going to tap into you again. We're coming out of the pandemic. Let's do something fun. So first thing is we created a concert for one of the nights. People hadn't seen each other in years, right? People hadn't traveled anywhere. So Duff helped us put together a cool rock concert, all British invasion tunes. He's got a band of chefs called Foie Rock, right? I mean, and so we had a good time with that. But the whole theme built back to Britain. Thinking of a British company, I thought, you know what? People haven't traveled. Let's take them back to our roots of London, the whole London calling, if you know kind of the first wave kind of music. And Duff's like, why don't you just make it Baker Street, right? Back to Sherlock Holmes. So we created this kind of fake walk through the town of London with storefronts, and you had Sherlock Holmes's globe cut out, and it was cake. So this time we said, Duff, create cake out of things that were very unexpected. Twining's teacups, shopping bags. It was really cool opportunity to make everything Britain and tie it back to our roots. And the concert was a lot of fun too.
Yeah, and again, in the middle of a convention hall where you're just not expected to be taken away.
Yes,
right? Like it just isn't the nature of how those things normally work. And it was, I think you guys had signature Nike Dunks on that all had.
We did, yeah. It had ABM on the left side and 23 on the other. I got to give some props to T-Mac, as I call her, but Trisha McNamara, our marketing manager, who created the cool kicks. And we're getting ready for 2025 now. It's already September next year.
Can we tease it a little bit?
I'll tease you a little bit.
All one of me that's going to be at the show.
Well, I will tell you this. We already have a rock concert planned. This time we've gone back to the board of IBIE. It's run by two different baking associations, American Bakers Association, ABA, as well as BEMA, which is the equipment manufacturers. And we said, we want to do this concert, but we want a better location, not a third floor ballroom that gets 600 people. We want thousands of people. So we've worked with them. We've gotten it approved. I've already signed the band. I'm not going to tease it, but let's just say we're going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to have a lot of fun that night. And if you like the 80s, boy, that's going to be our theming.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So, well, let's go back a little bit, because clearly you bring an energy level and an experience level that isn't typically what I would find in the baking industry when it comes to marketing.
Well, so I appreciate that.
But I think
there are a lot of good
certainly
stories.
Why I have gravitated towards you over the years that we've known each other. But let's go back a little bit, because you spent some time. Was it first with the Orlando Magic? Is that where we started this whole thing?
I mean, how deep do you want to go? I mean, we can go really deep. And I was lucky. This is coming out of the Museo Awards just the other night here in St. Louis, and I got a chance to see one of the icons in broadcasting get celebrated, Bob Costas. So I was a broadcast major at the University of Florida going back in the late 80s, and thought I'd be the next ESPN guy. Then I kind of determined I wanted to go more into pro sports, into management. So, but at the time, I had done an internship, a free internship over the summer with the Orlando Magic, and it was a great opportunity. This is right after the team was formed, so you're talking 1990-ish. This is even before, Nick Anderson was the first guy kind of picked by the team, the first rookie.
This is before Shaq.
This is pre-Shaq. But eventually, I found my way back there. I went to grad school at Ohio University that had a sports management program, interned with the Dodgers, and had that kind of pro sports mentality. But my boss from the Orlando Magic days, this is a good.
So before we get there, were you an athlete I mean, were you?
No.
Because it was one of the things
I played tennis, and I was like the worst guy on the team. All right, this is how bad it was. Can I tell you a tennis story? This will take 2 seconds, but it's the first doubles match I had in high school. I'm playing with this guy. I mean, we're like 5th and 6th on the team, not good, and we're playing against the worst of the other team. And I'm up at the net. My buddy's serving. He serves in the back of my head, the first ball, and I'm like, we got routed. And that was probably the end of my tennis career.
I mean, honestly, just to sort of, prior to my baking career, going into sports management was something that I always thought about. I was the kid that knew the back of every baseball card, knew all the statistics. But every time I looked at the industry, it always felt like if you weren't a professional athlete, how were you ever going to break in, right? Because it all seemed to be a little bit of nepotism, and there was that whole thing that if you weren't part of the club, you couldn't get into the club. So I just never knew the path to take, or never felt like there was much.
You just had to put yourself out there. I mean, I was announcing basketball games for my high school after I graduated. I was in college. But it gave me an opportunity when I went to the University of Florida. I got involved in the athletic department in marketing and promotions. And a guy named Joel Glass, who ended up being my boss at the Orlando Magic years later, I was there before he was. He gave me a shot as a freshman at Florida to be the PA announcer for Gator baseball. And look how that has turned, into a lot of things. I worked every basketball game. I announced women's basketball from a PA standpoint. Was at every Gator football game, working on the highlight show, even before Steve Spurrier came in, and he was there my last year. So it's more like you just got to get after it and find a passion.
Like everything else, right?
And it was fun. You didn't have to be, a former athlete. Certainly I wasn't. But just going after it and having an interest and showing a passion for it, boy, man, it makes you stand out. And being there at every turn. Don't say no, say yeah, and.
So you wind up in the Magic in the early
This
90s,
is 95 to 98. Yeah. So I'm there.
And this is pre-social media.
Oh.
This is like before the NBA was really what we know of it today too.
It was big. NBA Jam was going, they had the video game. Shaq and Penny Hardaway had just lost in the finals against the Houston Rockets 4-0. Some free throws down the stretch in game one kind of doomed, and there we were. But I started right after that. But I was a part of a team that was as hot as anybody. You're talking Patrick Ewing with the Knicks. MJ, certainly what he was doing. You can see there's no championship ring on my right hand because a guy named Michael Jordan kind of stole it at every cost and every turn. But it was an opportunity to be, we're coming into holiday week or weeks here in St. Louis, and when your team's good, guess what? You're playing on Thanksgiving. You're playing on Christmas. You're playing on Easter. You're playing on New Year's Day. And that's how it was, but it was exciting. And
were you traveling
glamorous.
with the team when you were?
I traveled some, and I remember, I think it was a game we had maybe at the Clippers, and maybe it was easy to beat the Clippers back then. But I remember we were all, I'm sitting behind the bench, and we hit a shot to win at the end, or we block them or something like that, but we won by like a point. And this whole team, we just run off the floor, and I'm running behind him, a 5'9" little white kid trying, with a buzz haircut, trying to run behind the team. But it was fun. And if I can tell you my first trip ever with the team, there's a guy named Dennis Scott.
Sure.
Right? Dennis Scott, great player, played at Georgia Tech, 3-point shooter. And the first road trip I had with him, we had our own, private aircraft for the Magic. It was part of Magic Air, or Magic Aviation. And Dennis Scott's like, Rook, you gotta carry my bag. And I'm like, what? He's like, Rook, you gotta get me some juice. And he gave me like $2, and I went to buy him some juice. It was $4, so he stiffed me $2. He got the juice, and I still gotta carry his bags. I'm like, are you kidding me? Dennis Scott, but he's on TV now doing some games, and what a character, but a great 3-point shooter. I looked up to him from the deep ball.
And I heard, somebody, I can't remember who it was, most recently said that you've got a good Shaq story that I just have to ask.
I'm going to try to clean it up a little bit, but okay. So if you can imagine a little white skinny kid in the locker room, and if you walked into the old Orlando arena, this is before they're building now. It was downtown, and there's kind of one entrance and one exit to the locker room. You walk into the right, you kind of see a U shape of all the lockers. To the left are the bathrooms and the showers and all that. I'm going in. It's like quiet. It's after practice. I'm putting fan mail in each of the players' lockers, And I turn around to the other side, to the left, and we had these kind of like those old Western doors, you know, that kind of wobble in and out. And it was like this. I mean, it was like that. And here comes Shaq, 7'1", buck naked with one of his do boys. A lot of these guys had handlers and, you know, buddies that would help him and stuff. But here's Shaq, stark naked, and he's like, bruh, come check this out. And I'm like, no, I'm good. He is blocking the exit at this point. I'm like, this is not going to end well for me, right? I've got the buzz haircut. I'm like, who knows? He's like, bro, come check this out. This is pretty nasty. And I'm like, oh, I could see myself getting a swirly. So I'm walking down towards the toilets. And if you're familiar with like soft serve ice cream, it was a beautiful swirl that was left in the commode, if you will. And it's ironic I worked for Anheuser-Busch later in my life because it was like a Clydesdale had deposited something there, and he's like, But that's one of my Shaq stories. But I will tell you too, if you want to go a little cleaner on this one, you could put both of your feet from end to end and still not fill up Shaq's shoe. I mean, crazy.
21
it was like a 23D or whatever it was. I mean, just an incredible enormity of a human being.
So we leave the Magic.
Yes.
Right? And we go to NASCAR.
Yes.
Is that right?
98 to 2000. I was there a couple years. And this was at the height of a guy named Dale Earnhardt Jr., right? Became very popular, won the Busch Series the couple years I was there. And boy, what an opportunity. I mean, I was.
Were you working for a team or were you working for NASCAR?
I was working for
itself?
NASCAR in Daytona Beach.
Okay.
So at the headquarters. And, to be there for the Daytona 500, you had great veterans like Bill Elliott and Rusty Wallace still. You had Dale Earnhardt Sr. there at the time. You had Sterling Marlin. Just some great racing going on. And then this was at the time when the young bucks were starting to kind of make their way. It was Matt Kenseth and Dale Earnhardt Jr. And those were the two young guys. Kevin Harvick came in a little bit later. But I remember a guy came onto the Busch Series scene, and you're like, who is this guy? You know, he's driving for, kind of a third or fourth owner kind of situation. But I'm looking at this guy, and I'm like, boy, if he drives as well as he talks, this kid's going to be pretty successful. And it was Jimmy Johnson, who ended up winning, 6 or 7 titles. I mean, one of the best for Lowe's. I mean, just you talk about consistency. He was an off-road, like Baja racer in California. Didn't fit the mold of coming from Kentucky or Carolina. But the exposure there was really good, which led me to the next route, was going to Anheuser-Busch. Dale Jr. went to go drive for Budweiser. I went to Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis to do more corporate on PR, worked a lot in sports marketing, and had the chance to kind of, this is a true story too, working with Dale Jr. on some races to give his regular PR guy, Jade Gurse, a little bit of a break. But it was like walking with Elvis, through the garage area with fans and the demand for Dale Earnhardt Jr., how big it was.
Sure. I mean, NASCAR's still that big.
It is.
I mean, you talk about F1 and everything with what Netflix has done for it, but in the end,
there was something that was really special,
deal.
though. Those stands were packed, and people went to see Dale Earnhardt Jr. He just brought a different face and a different edge. A pretty remarkable time, and it was fun to work with him.
And then when you went, so you ended up doing some stuff with Stella Artois, right? Like leading that brand.
Well, it was interesting because I started in PR with them. That was the first half of my career. It was all in public relations and media relations. And then at AB, after about 6 years, doing a lot within corporate PR, including working on the bud business in China and the Dominican Republic and so on and so forth, I ended up making the move into the brand side. So I have to thank a guy named Andy Goller, gave me a shot to do that. Worked on brands like Rolsch, Landshark, eventually to Michelob Ultra, and then headed up Stella Artois for the U.S. for 2.5 years or so. You talk about a great brand. I mean, here's a brand that's spending, I'll say it now because it's been 11 years, but we spent $8 million a year on chalices, on the glassware.
Right.
But the whole point was, how important is this glass? If we spend so much time and attention in making sure it's perfect, the glassware, then how good is the beer that goes into the vessel? It's got to be pretty darn good.
So how did you come to that? Let's dive into that a little bit because I find it to be fascinating. Was that something that you just saw that they were doing in Europe and then you decided to kind of blow it up, or did you create that whole thing sort of out of nothing?
No, it was kind of it was starting to really
I mean, there was
Bubble up.
printed pint glasses at the time, but nobody was doing specialty glass.
Yeah, the chalice had just kind of come about maybe a few years before. So I was lucky, but I was able to really push it even more forward. We even did personalized chalices around holidays, or on package, you'd have some promotional deals where you could get your own Stella Artois chalice and they would engrave it and ship it to you. But it was just special. It's a different mentality because it was CPG versus a B2B, but at the same time, everybody's a customer, everybody's a consumer. And what was interesting about it, here's some of the background on the thinking for Stella Artois, is the whole theme, like Passionate About Baking, for example, for AB Mauri, it's a discerning gentleman. That's what our terminology was. Each brand at Anheuser-Busch, underneath AB InBev, had kind of a theme. And even a target consumer, ours was a guy named Ben. Just kind of a generic.
So you named
we
it.
Did.
Exactly.
We knew what their habits were. We looked every week. How was awareness? What was trial? What's your most often brand, or most often 3 brands? We really dove into the weeds. But that was the beauty of a company that had those type of resources. You could do it. You could go in and hang out with Ben's that you found in L.A. and walk the streets with them at night and go to bars with them and understand what their drinking habits were, and what their friends were like, and what are the things they do. Are they going to, cool nightclubs, or are they going to dive bars? Well, Ben wasn't going to a dive bar, right? He was going to a nicer place. He was going for a good dinner. He was going to a cool concert, where, no offense, but it is true, right? Busch Light. You might be out hunting a little bit. You might be going to a ball game. And that's okay, right? There's a price point difference, and there's also a consumer difference.
Sure. So you talked about Ben there for a second. So give me some other examples of how sort of understanding that consumer behavior, or that consumer most specifically, has influenced like major decisions on a campaign or something, how did you take that persona and then turn it into something bigger?
Well, I think for a couple of things. All right, we'll stay on Stella Artois because it's an interesting kind of case study of what the brand was like, right? It's coming off of the UK, where there was a problem where they had started putting the beer in the wrong accounts and going into lower brow, right, cheaper accounts. And it had a mentality over in the UK as being a wife beater beer. You can look it up. It's a good case study for college. And so we were so uber careful in elevating it, making sure it's an elevated experience, right? If you look at, how beer pricing, just walk down the aisle at the time, and you had Stella Artois at a super premium level. You had Budweiser at a premium. You had Busch at a kind of a value. Nothing wrong with all. They all are serving different customers, and they're all great beers. But Stella Artois was one of those things that had to be protected. So we put it into things like the Sundance, festival for film. We did, things within art, things that were just kind of elevated experiences. And it was all about being a discerning gentleman. And so to kind of close the loop on that. But then you contrast it with working on Land Shark. So if people like Corona or the kind of that beach lifestyle, Land Shark was the beer that we marketed. It was through Margaritaville. Jimmy Buffett owned the rights to it, but we actually marketed it, and we brewed it, and we sold it for him. And so it's a totally different element when you're thinking about concerts on the beach in Gulf Shores, Alabama, versus doing a very high-end event in New York City for Stella Artois.
Sure. Is Land Shark still around?
Oh, it is. Yeah. Fins up. I love it. It was a great beer.
And what was happening with craft at the time? Because now at this time, this is the sort of the escalation of craft beer also. So
Absolutely.
Now you're taking a European brand, which for a long time, whether it was Heineken or like those things had a cachet, but certainly as everything became much more localized, now you're competing not just with other super premiums out of Europe, but now you're competing with everybody's local stuff, right?
Absolutely. And that was kind of right on the cusp of that. It was around the same time Goose Island came into our fold out of Chicago, which is a pretty well-revered one of the first almost mass craft brands.
Which is a great story, by the way.
Oh, it absolutely is. But they had even a brand called Matilda that, like, higher end bottle, very elevated price point, just a way to kind of expand, the way people think about the brand and the beer.
So how did you sort of compete with that, or what did you think? What were you thinking of craft at the time?
It wasn't even part of our discussion, to be honest. It was more looking at, Heineken was the big one. Certainly, you had the Peronis and some of the other high-end imports, but it was really a Stella Artois and Heineken world.
Sure. So what are the core lessons that you pulled out of all of these different experiences, especially with the CPG or the more the direct consumer or the fan? And what are the core things that you've pulled there that you still kind of go to the well with now? Because it's so different, at least it feels to me that it would be so different. But you certainly bring this really neat energy to the whole thing today. So how do you build on that with what you're doing now, which is much more, as you mentioned, B2B and just different?
When I started with AB Mauri, I'm coming from the CPG world and having these fantastic experiences in sports, and B2B to me means business to boring. It's not business to boring. And here's the thing. Everybody's a consumer. Even the creative that I did initially with AB Mauri, it was like, we're going to the end consumer here. We need to have a creative message. You need to have some energy. So the point is, no matter what business you're in, there's an opportunity to excite people, and there's a way to intrigue people or to stand out.
Is that what they were expecting of you? Like, how did they view you coming out of that world when they brought you in? Because obviously it was, did you come into when the Innovation Center was built here in St. Louis? Was that sort of all?
It was a year before that. So we were out in Timberlake Manor out in Chesterfield, and then we made the move into Cortex in 2015, which was a big change for us. But let me tell you, like, one of the big marketing programs we had before I started, desk calendars. Josh, desk
I think
calendars.
I have a lunch pail still.
I don't know, but we handed out desk calendars. Those ones that the big pages, to our customers. And I was like, "Are you kidding me? This is the big idea." And then, having the opportunity at the time, we had a president, Mark Prendergast, who had a lot of faith and said, "Hey, I hired you because you're thinking differently. You've got different experiences. I could have hired somebody coming from baking, or I could have hired somebody from outside. You've got different thoughts. Go to town." And he gave me a lot of freedom.
So on the flip side of that, what were your thoughts? Like, what took you out of that? You're in a pretty exciting, you're going to the Kentucky Derby, you're going, you were involved with some really, as you mentioned, fun stuff, right?
I was with Anheuser-Busch for 13 years.
So was this as soon as the InBev?
I was there 8 years with the Busch family, and that was a different dynamic than 5 years under InBev, right? And they both were vastly different ownership styles. But the opportunity with AB Mauri was, hey, you're going to be your own guy. You're going to have a chance to kind of run your own ship. You're going to answer straight to me, the president. And it was liberating and freeing, and to be able to have a creative idea and say, hey, what do you think? Oh, yeah, let's go. I had somebody who was bought in, and just by showing a few of those examples, it's easier to kind of win along the support system, the sales team and all that. Because at the end of the day, they want stuff to talk about. They want things to be intrigued about that they can take to their customers.
As a marketing guy, though, let's for just a second, like, if you looked at it as a pie or something, how much of it do you think is that internal piece where you're trying to energize, excite, get the sales team on board with defining whether it's core values or core product characteristics or things to go out and really be excited about versus trying to convince the customer of the product that you have? How do you split that pie?
I don't know if I've ever split it up that way, but it's a really good question. I'd probably have to think a little bit deeper, but off the gut, I'd almost say 50-50 because I think there's a huge opportunity to excite your system because They're the best mouthpieces you ever have.
And I think that's a big piece of it. Going back, I mean, what brought the trade show thing to me to kind of start this conversation was this idea that your folks, I mean, they've got custom kicks on. They're just as excited about Duff Goldman being inside of this booth and walking through this London calling and this whole experience. I remember how excited they were. Hey, you got to go check this out. You got to go look at this. And that's such a big piece of it, and it's probably a part of us that all of us as small business folks don't think enough about with marketing, and it's really only kind of post-pandemic for us that we've started to think about it, even from a retention standpoint. Like, what are the things that we can do that have external value, that have branding thoughts, but that really are about selling, this is a good place for you to build a career internally. And it's an interesting dynamic that for me has changed even in the 31 years that I've been doing it pretty dramatically, that it's probably leaned more internal than external. But I was really curious as to how you looked at it.
I think the way I kind of see it when it comes to an event like IBIE, where we're trying to create this experience for people that are coming to our booth and create talk value and be like, hey, did you see what the AB Mauri guys are doing? They did it again. Here we go. But I think part of my role is if you think back to like Ringling Brothers, is to be a little bit of a town crier and a circus, not a circus salesman. I'm not selling, snake oil and stuff like that, but I am selling some pretty cool stuff that you want to come by. But there's some really cool substance. If you stop by and you catch somebody's eye, then it's our team's job to really make that extra sale. But they've got a little moxie, they got a little swagger. Yeah. And I think that's really important in business. Are you selling millions of dollars of stuff at a trade show? Well, you're technically not supposed to, but you're creating some conversations, and you're creating some intrigue that at least starts those conversations.
And what's the buzz internally like leading up to next year? Are they all asking, what do we do? Like,
we've already.
But they all know, or do you keep it? Do you sort of unveil it a little bit at a time?
I try to, pull the drape up a little bit slowly, but by this point now, they all have a good understanding of where we're going. Like, we've had some sales meetings, and they're pretty much in tune. They don't know all the nuts and bolts, but as we get closer, they'll know everything.
So what else is kind of coming down the pipeline as you look ahead from the marketing perspective? The trade shows are a big deal. Where else do you put a lot of your energy from a marketing perspective?
Well, I'll say this, just 3 months ago, AB Biotek, and technically AB Mauri was the company that acquired Omega Yeast. So this is a liquid yeast company in Chicago that a couple guys, Mark Schwartz and Lance Shaner, started 10 years ago, and they're competing against other players in the liquid yeast area for beer specifically, right? These guys make to order, great yeast strains for all types of beers, ales, lagers, from a high level to IPAs to Hefeweizens to stouts, whatever. So we bought this business just over 3 months ago, and so we're kind of getting used to each other. Historically, our business has been very dry yeast centered, so we make it over in Europe and we ship it around the world. Liquid yeast doesn't have the same kind of like shelf life that you would have with a dry yeast. So we're getting to know each other a little bit better as we bring this business together. So that's been
it's an interesting time. I mean, we've had some folks from the industry on the show, and certainly as somebody who pays attention to what's going on, it's a struggling industry. So it's a really interesting time to buy into that business. Where do you see the beer industry going right now? I mean, we're seeing a lot less alcohol consumption. We're seeing seltzers, and like the world's moving in a different direction, especially the young folks. So
and today's consumer is maybe not drinking as much, or they take breaks, or but there are opportunities. Cocktails, and even the canned cocktails, and some of those things have done well. The wine business is certainly in a different place too, and it's not like beer that you can sell every day at the bar. Wine, you have one season as you get into July, the crush season, to make that wine. So you really got like one big push to do it, and then you're sitting on the stock, and even a little bit with. You're seeing it, I think, in the U.S. where distillers are making product to sell right away, but they're also kind of putting stuff away to age
Sure.
a little bit. So, but the dynamic with today's consumer, I mean, it's a little bit of a challenge. And how do you, at the end of the day, innovation changes industries, right? If you don't innovate, you kind of die. You really do. You can't be selling the same product every day for 100 years, all right? Case in point, on our podcast a couple months ago, I had the gentleman who is now the head of Hey Dude, Terrence Riley. Hey Dude makes shoes, and they've licensed them with Margaritaville, kind of casual lifestyle. But he was heading up the company Stanley. And I'm not talking about tools here. I'm talking about, the drinking vessels,
right.
the thermoses and all that. It started
that every seventh grader in the world is carrying.
Exactly. But a lot of soccer moms out there too, and that it changed the business. Originally, the business model started out selling to guys that were hardworking, maybe green or kind of a plaid color, just very industrial. Well, then he pivoted and said, wow, we can go after a different target consumer, right? Innovate. Here, let's just change colors. How about pink? How about going after moms that are on the go, whether it's, working hard, having great jobs, trying to provide for their families, trying to take kids to events, juggling all the things that go on to, to a person today. And they changed the mentality, and the sales went from 70 million to like 700 million, like in the span of a couple years. I mean, you talk about a great marketing case, but it was simple innovation. But the innovation was beyond just the product, but the innovation was like, who are we going to go after? Who are we targeting?
Who's the Ben? Who's the Ben, right?
Yeah, who's the Ben now? And it was more Ben Amina. Is that a female name? I don't know. But you know what I mean? It's so I give them props for what they did. Huge kudos, because it was a change in thinking of not only let's broaden our base, let's go after a certain target, but also let's give them something that appeals to them. They don't want the dark colors and the plaids. They want things that are more inspiring, or maybe a nice collaboration with Starbucks.
Sure. So you mentioned a podcast. So you host a podcast, The Oven Light.
I do.
For AB Mauri.
Yes.
I was a guest a few months back, but I
guest.
don't know the episode number. And that, I think you approach that in the same way that I approach this. It feels like it's a lot of curiosity, right? It was an opportunity to talk to folks in the industry, highlight what folks are doing that's fun and important. And I know it's something that you really enjoy. So how long have you been doing that?
I guess it's been almost 3 years. And I do enjoy it. I originally thought, we need something. We're coming out of the pandemic. How do we get that mouthpiece on the experts within our own company, right? And we started that way. Our first episode with Brent Fenton, who was a new president at the time, did incredibly well. I think it still might be our highest podcast, because people were like, who is this guy? We were wearing masks at the time. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? Tell me about yourself. But over time, I've morphed it beyond just baking to lifestyle, and how can baking interact with our stories, or how can consumer alcohol interact with today's stories. And it's been a lot of fun. I've had a musician for the band Foreigner. I've had a guy who's one of the lead sports memorabilia guys in the country. I just had a fellow Gator, Uncle Matt from Uncle Matt's Organic Orange Juice on. It just was released last week. And I had a head chef from the Ronald McDonald House just on, and that'll be in an upcoming episode. But they're stories. They're great stories. The things you find out when people are just talking, and you try to figure out, is there a little element about baking? Well, Brandon Steiner, who's a sports memorabilia guy up in New York, and he went to Syracuse, big in the sports marketing program up there. He tells me when he was a kid, and I just read a little bit more on this story last week. He was selling milk and bagels on the street in New York City. And he would knock on this lady's door and say, hey, would you like to buy my bagels or buy the newspaper or whatever? And she was like, well, I can just get the newspaper delivered. It's no big deal. And he comes back the next day and says, well, how about I deliver your newspaper, but then also bring bagels for you as well? I gave you that value add. And she goes, you do that for me? And he goes, yeah, I would. Well, he's also the guy, if you look on his LinkedIn, he says he created the everything bagel. Right. So who am I to dispute that? I love Brandon. He's great. And so, I mean, who knew a story like that? Or I was talking about Terrence from Hey Dude, the footwear brand, and Stanley. And he recounted a story he hadn't said probably in at least a decade. He was recounting a story of how his dad would make Irish soda bread for the family. I think it was maybe around the holidays. And he didn't get choked up, but he was a little emotional. He was like, thanks for helping me bring that story. I haven't talked about that in a long time. And everybody's got a story like that. If it was, my grandmother would make these, and my mom carried it on, these Hello Dolly cookies. Some people call them magic cookie bars, right? It's graham cracker crust, Eagle brand milk. You throw in coconut and chocolate chips, butterscotch chips. Unbelievable. But like my wife is now third generation creating a thin apple pie. And I should bring some to you because I think you'd love it. You take a cookie sheet, and instead of like your regular deep dish apple pie, it's really thin. So you cut these slices. It's like a hand pie. You just kind of pick it up and go. But she picked it up.
Is that a Thanksgiving thing? When do you have that?
All year round, man. I'm telling you what. And Cindy does a great job with it. And I think, don't tell her mom and her grandmother's passed, but she picked it up from her grandmother, and she's the best at it. And it's just amazing, those little baking stories that people have.
Yeah. I mean, it is really cool, and it brings people together, and certainly, and you guys had your own issues during the pandemic with yeast availability and everything else, like we all did. But so what do you? I mean, obviously,
well, can I tell you a story on that? Since you're talking about yeast availability, all right. So
we'll
imagine
go supply chain for a second.
Let's talk supply chain. Yeast demand was what 600%. It was up 600% during the pandemic, right off the bat. Right, people are looking for TP. They're looking back to Shaq.
And these are just these are the packets in the grocery store.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
The packs of active dry.
Exactly, or the jars if you were going to Sam's. So it was tough to come by. But I was lucky enough. I had some in the office, and my wife would put a call out to family and some friends and be like, all right, if you need yeast, it was kind of like you cover your ear and you're like, all right, come by Tuesday night, and there'll be a white baggie, a clear bag of white dust, you know what I mean? And come by and pick up some yeast. It was kind of crazy. It was like a drug deal gone bad, but it was exciting. People were baking again, and they did that. It was... people were home doing things like home renovation. They were maybe working on a hobby they hadn't thought about for a long time, and they were baking. It was pretty cool. I mean, it was a wild time, and I think people got back to the basics of what was important to them.
Yeah, and I think there's been some lingering effect of that, and at the same time, they recognize the challenges and the effort and the energy, which then helps folks like me who are doing it every day. They continue to search out for quality. But it's been really, I mean, you've got some great stories. So tell me how you sort of relax and recharge when you're not telling tall tales about your past.
Well, I'll say this. My wife likes to say we're extreme vacationers, and in a way we are. Our family was fortunate enough. We were able to buy a place during the pandemic before things went crazy down in Florida. So we spent a little time just north of St. Augustine. St. Augustine is a little hidden gem.
Is that on the Gulf?
It is on the northeast side, just south of Jacksonville.
Oh, okay.
But a beautiful part of the country. Plus, it gets back to my Gator roots. But I like to go to sporting events and concerts with family and friends. I mean, here was last week. Pretty wild week. My son wanted to see ZZ Top, right? Or 2/3 of it is, you've got Elwood in there.
Does your son know who ZZ Top is?
Oh, he loves them. He is an 80s music aficionado.
Did you just tease out who the band is going to be?
No,
at
I
the
did not
IE?
tease. That is not who they are. So on a Thursday night, I took him to ZZ Top at the factory. Friday night, I somehow coaxed my wife, and she had a much better time than she thought. Casey and the Sunshine Band. Right, at River City Casino. And then got up early morning Saturday with my son. We flew to Pittsburgh. We caught the Penguins that night. They won 4-3 in overtime. And then we caught the Steelers game against the Ravens. And we won. We won 18-16, I believe. And then we flew home Sunday night. So he was... ready for school the next morning. So,
and I don't even know if I want to go down this rabbit hole with you because we really should start to wrap up. But I know you're a huge Willie Stargell fan.
Oh yeah,
and I know that you're part of the Willie Stargell Foundation.
Yes,
raising money. Is it for kidney?
Kidney. Yep, kidney disease.
So you're a Pittsburgh sports guy through and
across
through.
the board. Yeah. I love it. Any chance, and I'll throw this out there too: is you never don't sleep on taking chances as you age too. I was almost 40 years old, and I told my wife I wanted to take part in the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball fantasy camp. We're not talking like you're looking at stats. This is playing real baseball for a week with your idols as your coaches, wooden bats, real baseballs, from guys age 30 till 80. And I've done it 5 times now, and it was a blast. And the types of friends that I found through this, a lot of them in Pittsburgh, are just remarkable. They're a great support system. So if there's any kind of charge out there for, don't be afraid to take that first step. Yeah. There are other people that are doing it with you, and you just never find. That's where the magic happens.
Well, Rick, I can't tell you how great it is to catch up with. Sit you down for a second because you're always moving, Josh, every time I see you. But thanks so much for joining me and talking about all this. And I'll be excited for next September when I get out to Vegas and see what you guys cook up.
We're going to have a great time. Be there September 14th to 17th, IBIE Las Vegas.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks so much for joining me today. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed sharing these insights from folks I truly admire. Be sure and follow the show in your favorite podcast player to be alerted to newly released episodes. And share a comment if you have any feedback or future contributor recommendations.